Welcome to another installment of the 2020 Virtual Global and Community Engagement Conference, formerly known as D80. The conference is a dialogue and celebration of our efforts to solve issues that confront the world's poorest 80%. Traditionally, it's a one-day conference featuring multiple in-person panels and breakout sessions. This year, the conference is being delivered virtually throughout the entire month of October, including a lecture series, a rosé gallery exhibit, a walking tour, and a series of online interviews with local and global changemakers throughout the Michigan Tech community. My name is Thomas Basal, and I'm a member of the Conference Planning Committee. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Caryn Heldt. I have a bio for Dr. Heldt that I'm going to read. Dr. Caryn L. Heldt is the director of the Health Research Institute, COVID Lab Technical Director, the James and Lorna Mac Chair in Bioengineering, and professor at the Department of Chemical Engineering at Michigan Technological University. She received her Bachelor's of Science in Chemistry and Chemical Engineering from Michigan Tech in 2001. She worked for 2 years at BASF Corporation before commencing her PhD studies. Upon receiving her PhD in Chemical Engineering from North Carolina State University in 2008 under the guidance of Dr. Reuben Carbonell, she joined Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute for her 2-year postdoctoral training under the guidance of Dr. Georges Belfort. In 2015, Dr. Heldt was awarded a National Science Foundation Career Award to study virus surface chemistry. Her research lab is focused on the purification, removal, inactivation, and detection of viruses and gene therapy vectors. Dr. Heldt, thank you for your time today.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it, Thomas.
All right, so the first question I have for you, would you just be willing to take a few minutes to tell me a little bit more about your project you have going on?
Sure. So I'm the technical lead for the COVID testing lab at Michigan Tech. And that was it's been quite the adventure to start up a medical lab. We are the only university in Michigan that started a certified medical testing lab that did not previously have either a medical or a veterinary lab. So University of Michigan and Michigan State started labs, but they already had certified labs on their university. We started in March because in March, if you lived in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, you pretty much could not get a COVID test. And so the reason for that was that you had to either have an exposure to a known person or had international travel was the only time they would even allow you to get the test because we didn't have the capability to process the test. The laboratory for the state of Michigan was just being inundated with the spike that was happening in Southeast Michigan and wasn't able to prioritize samples from the UP. And when we realized this, we really wanted to see if we could help. And so it took us 3 weeks to determine how to set up a medical certified COVID testing lab. If we had the capability to do it both safely, which was the #1 priority, and if we had the technical capabilities to do it. And then we then had to just go through all the certification tests. And it was amazing watching the university come together. We had expertise. So I had expertise in the safety of viruses, and so did some other people in biology. But then we had to know how to do PCR, which is polymerase chain reaction, which is the test we run. And we found expertise in PCR in biology, but we also found it in forestry. And so our forestry department has been really essential in getting this set up because they brought their PCR experience, and then with my biosafety level experience, we were able to put together a process that would flow, and so that we could process a lot of tests at once. The other group that we could not have done this without is our medical laboratory sciences program. And so they are training students to work in medical labs. And so they know what the certification requirements are, what type of documentation we need. And so they've also been essential. And then we had other people, IT, facilities, like other parts of the university. it took everybody coming together. And looking back at it, the only reason we were able to accomplish all of this is because we did it when the university was shut down. So we did it in March and April after there was no research going on in the grad labs. You weren't allowed on campus unless you had were essential, which we were deemed essential and were allowed on campus. And the undergrad courses were all online. And so because of that, we were able to bring all of these people together and get this lab started.
It certainly sounds like Michigan Tech had a lot of the tools and diversity of people in STEM that were able to make this come together, and it's truly super impressive. Did you say it took roughly 3 weeks from the beginning of the idea to get the first tests coming through and processed?
It did. It took 3 weeks, and we were really, really proud of that fact. We did work some weekends to get that to happen. But we've been told that the Stanford lab took 3 weeks to get up and running. So we thought that was a pretty good time frame.
Yeah, super impressive. And I'm sure we'll touch base on it a little further along in the interview, but it's been quite impressive how the lab has progressed from its beginning stages of getting everything certified and getting the first samples in, all the way up to where it is now, being able to have quite an impressive testing regimen for Michigan Tech students and just the entire Upper Peninsula in general. All right, so touching a little bit more on the importance of having a COVID-19 testing lab in the Upper Peninsula, would you be willing to elaborate a little further about how your project and work with starting up the COVID diagnostic testing lab fits in with the mission of the Global Community and Engagement Conference?
Sure. I think really what we were focusing on providing a service for a community that could not access it. And so since the UP was not being allowed to even do COVID tests because they couldn't be processed, we wanted to create something that was needed, and that was a way to process these tests in the Western Upper Peninsula. We started in April processing about 20 tests a day. We're now up to over 200 a day. And over the course of that time, about 30% of our tests have been run for Michigan Tech and for our surveillance program to make sure that the campus is safe. But the other 70% have been run for the community. And so this has really been a community effort. How can we provide for our local healthcare providers and support them in the best way that we can? And we continue to do that both by processing tests, but also staying in communication with the local healthcare providers as they go through different ways of testing, as they have supply issues for getting testing reagents. And so we've been really in constant communication with them to try to support the community as much as we can. As we know, being in such a rural place as we are, we're often forgotten or the last people on the line to be thought of. So it's great that we're able to provide this service for our community that may not otherwise have the capability to be doing the testing that we're doing.
Yeah, I agree. It is extremely impressive. And I think a lot of times, at least in my experience in March, when everything was kind of starting up with COVID and more information was being learned, if you turned on the news or just went online to look at different news sources, a lot of what you heard about were places like New York City or California, more population dense areas. And I agree that sometimes rural areas kind of get swept under the rug a little bit. It's definitely kind of scary to think about how different COVID outbreaks could have happened without a robust testing program or just the opportunity to have tests in general. From the beginning of when the lab started up to now, how have things changed from your perspective as more information has been learned and maybe even more resources have come available to the Upper Peninsula?
So from our testing lab point of view, we have been able to ramp up our number of tests just by learning how to be more efficient. We started our lab from zero. And so we had to develop the IT solutions. We had to develop our faxing solutions to get reports out to people. And so we've been able to grow by learning and by constant improvement and constantly thinking about how to make things more efficient. And so that's been extremely helpful. We've also received some funds from the Portage Health Foundation recently to get additional equipment so that we can be more efficient. But just thinking about the pandemic in general is that it's so important that people understand that the science is constantly evolving. So while we're running the same test as we did in April, I think science around wearing masks, social distancing has changed so much. And it's been difficult for people to understand why things are changing so much. But as scientists, this is normal for us. My job as a scientist is to create a hypothesis, a guess of why I think something is happening, and then I have to test if that's right or not. And so I think the biggest challenge in the pandemic in general has been the suspicion of the general public not understanding that process of we have to guess the way that the virus transmits and then test it. And so that's why different guidances have been changing very quickly, is because that's how fast we're learning about things. And so that's been really difficult. But the other thing that I think that Michigan Tech is doing amazing on top of the testing lab is that they also are helping the local health department with contact tracing. So contact tracing is also an extremely important part of containing this virus and any infectious disease. So understanding where people have been and who they've been in contact with. And so not only is Michigan Tech providing this testing lab, but they're also providing a lot of resources to our local community on contact tracing.
Yeah, for sure. A couple points there. Correct me if I have the title of this wrong, but I believe I read a some form of kind of like a short essay. I think it was titled "The Scientific Method on Display" or something like that. I think that's definitely worth linking in the description of this interview, because I think it's something that a lot of people should read, and I think you touched on that kind of briefly. I personally found that to be super interesting and gave me a new perspective on the pandemic and all the rapid changes in information that we have. And you said the word community, and what you were describing in one of the prior questions about how Michigan Tech was able to come together and make this possible is just truly incredible, especially in such a short time frame. And especially in the summer, as all of it was happening with the fall semester coming up and getting students back on campus. Would you be willing just to talk just in general about what it's been like for you as the director of the technical aspects of the COVID lab to be communicating with the university about contact tracing, surveillance testing, and just in general, helping students and faculty, staff get back onto campus in a safe way?
So I've been part of some of the conversations with the MTU Flex team. So the MTU Flex team is our COVID response team. And so really, my job on that part of the team is to relay to them the capacities of the lab, what we can do, make sure that we are running as many tests as we can, but also making sure we're not overwhelming the lab. And that, because if we overwhelm the lab and have too many tests come in, then we really slow down results. And that's not useful either. And so there are constant meetings of different groups on campus, part of MTU Flex, that are really working together to make sure that both the students are safe, but also, as I said, is also we want to make sure our community is safe. Michigan Tech has 7,500 students, And we live in a community of about 12,000 permanent residents. And so Michigan Tech is a huge part of this community. And so keeping Michigan Tech safe is also part of keeping the community safe. And so we are constantly talking to within Michigan Tech, but we're also constantly talking to the health department and the local providers, making sure that we are all on the same page, that we're not duplicating work, and that we're really complementing each other and helping each other as much as possible. Because really, this is a community effort. This is not a Michigan Tech effort. It's an effort to keep our entire community safe.
Yeah, certainly, certainly. And I think you mentioned previously that 70% of the samples roughly that come through the lab are community samples, and then 30% are from the Michigan Tech surveillance samples. And I think that alone kind of attests to the importance of community beyond just Michigan Tech. The population of Houghton County, Keweenaw County, and just the entire area has really been touched by the privilege of being able to have such a robust testing program here. Quite impressive. So I'm wondering how you personally were able to get this idea of starting the testing lab. And I know that there were a lot of different people involved with it. Definitely a team effort. But I was just curious how your background with your research, what you're doing as a PhD student and your postdoctoral training, how that influenced you and gave you the idea to try to take a shot at making a testing lab, especially since you said that Michigan Tech's the only university in Michigan that didn't have a prior testing laboratory, if that's correct. Yeah, so I'm just wondering what your inspiration was.
So I'm going to admit this was not my idea. What happened was I received a phone call from my chair on a Wednesday evening, and I can tell you I will never again accept a phone call from my chair in the evening. He calls me up and he says, "The chair of electrical engineering would like to talk to you." And I was very confused because I didn't know what that meant. And what I realized was that the chair of electrical engineering knows well our Greg Markkinen, who is our state representative in Lansing. And it was Greg's idea that could Michigan Tech actually do COVID-19 testing? And I was asked that question because I'm the director of the Heldt Research Institute. And the Heldt Research Institute brings together all the different health researchers on campus. And so I'm aware of a lot of the equipment we have on campus. I'm aware of a lot of the expertise we have on campus involving health research. And so the other reason I was asked is because I work with infectious viruses in my lab. So the focus of my lab is finding different ways of inactivating viruses and also in vaccine manufacturing. So how can we make vaccines faster, get them to market faster, cheaper? We're also interested in ways that we can stabilize vaccines to eliminate the cold chain. And so that's where we have to keep vaccines cold throughout both manufacturing, but distribution, because we actually throw away worldwide about 50% of our vaccines because the cold chain is not maintained. So I understand virus stability. I understand how to work with them safely. And so the first thing I looked up was, can we even do this? Because Michigan Tech can, there's 4 biosafety levels, and Michigan Tech can work with biosafety level 1 and 2 organisms. Once you get to biosafety level 3 and 4, we don't have the facilities to be able to handle those types of organisms. And I knew that SARS-CoV-2 was a biosafety level 3 organism. And so at first I was like, I don't see how we can do this because we don't have biosafety level 3 facilities. But I quickly did some searches on the CDC website, and testing is biosafety level 1, biosafety level 2, I'm sorry. Biosafety level 3 is to grow it and to do research on it in your lab, which is what we cannot do. But to test it is biosafety level 2. So that was the first thing that I was able to determine. And then when I saw that it was a real-time PCR assay, I then started asking people, where are all the real-time PCR machines on campus? I knew there was one, but then I quickly found out there was two. One was in biology and one was in forestry. We started asking around, and what we could determine is there was not another real-time PCR machine in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. We asked Northern Michigan University, we asked Lake State, and nobody else seemed to have these. And so from a Wednesday evening phone call that I received, I was on a conference call with about 20 people Thursday morning. And we started talking about what we knew. The phone calls actually started out twice a day. What did we know? What questions do we have? And, you know, for the first 2 weeks, those twice a day phone calls, in half a day, we would have more information. It was amazing how fast we were gathering information to try to figure out how to run the test, how to safely run the test, how to communicate the results, how to certify a lab. That was quite an interesting part. We had to find a medical lab director. And it took networking throughout the team to be able to find a medical lab director. So our medical lab director is Dr. Caryn Gottlieb, and he lives in Marquette, and he's a pathologist at OSF in Escanaba, and he is our lab director, and he's been amazing. He's constantly answering questions for us, and doesn't get upset when we ask what is probably a silly question because we've never run an actual medical lab. Mm-hmm. And so really it was the pushing of our legislatures and just the will of the people on the team is what got this started, because we all quickly agreed that this was super important and we needed to do it.
That's amazing, and I'm sure it was super exciting, along with very busy to get all of this going so quickly, especially as information was changing. And then the whole other element that I think sometimes people forget about is that as this was getting up and running, people were still really adjusting to a lot of online correspondence and still being at home for the most part, or just being alone, trying to limit the spread of any virus. Although I do have to say, I'm sure that as you continue doing your research with vaccine stability and all of the other things, I'd try to describe it more, but I would not be able to do it anywhere near close to justice. I'm sure that's been super interesting, especially as we're starting to inch closer to getting a vaccine, hopefully sometime within the next year or so. So I'm sure that's been super exciting on top of all of the things you're doing for the testing lab and all of that, but I'm sure it keeps you super, super busy.
It does. It keeps me very busy.
To wrap up our time, what's one big takeaway you'd like others to know about this initiative, or just in general, any other final thoughts you'd like to share?
Really, I couldn't be more proud to be a Husky. It took the entire university to pull this off. Dr. David Reed, who is our vice president of research, said it best when he said, "We didn't know we weren't supposed to do this." It's been hard. It's been a struggle. It has been the greatest learning experience of my life and probably the most difficult thing I've ever done. And looking back, I don't think I would change it. I'm so proud of the team that we have worked with and how Michigan Tech has very closely done the impossible. And I'm just so proud to be a part of it.
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate your insight, and I definitely learned a lot too. And I hope anyone that's watching this is going to learn a lot about how this all came together and can have new perspective and even more appreciation than anyone already has for um, what you and many others have done to help out Michigan Tech and in general just the entire community around us. Um, I'd
Um,
like to I'd like to thank you again for joining us. It's really appreciated. Um, for all those that are listening, please be sure to check out all the other interviews with other change makers in the Michigan Tech community. You can do this by going to mcu.edu and searching Global and Community Engagement Conference into the search tab. Thanks again for listening, and I hope everyone has a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas.